Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This evening in the studio we have Patrick O'Sullivan. Hey, Patrick.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good. I'll just give you a minute or two to introduce yourself.
Okay, well, you know my name. The subject that we're going to cover, I understand, is going to be what led up to the occupation of Tieke on the Wānanga River, 21 kilometres up from Papriki by boat.
Yep.
And being the original secretary of Te Wānanga o Tieke, and prior to that, the secretary to the Wānanga Trust that put the initial claim through for the Waimarino Block, of which Tieke is a part. I do have some background knowledge as to what happened there and why the occupation occurred. And that's what I understand we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, that's right. Well, any information is good information, and especially if you don't know much about stuff and you can only go off what you've been told by others who don't really understand what was going on. I don't understand. I didn't realise there was such a big issue around it right at the beginning. But I've got some questions here, so if I ask these questions, you'll be able to elaborate for me. Okay. What were the primary reasons behind the occupation of Tieke Marae on the Wānanga River?
Well, before I get to the primary reasons, we'll just go back a little bit.
Yep.
I can't remember the exact date, but I think about 1988, 89, a claim went in for the Waimarino Block, fronted by Joan Lakapita, and to be negotiated by the Wānanga Trust. Now, the problem with Waimarino Block is this. On the 16th of March 1886, the judge ordered that a title be issued to the block covering 1,005 owners. Now, the block included 88,000 acres of the Aotea block, and that stretches from Redimu up towards Taumanui, and the boundary of the block is at a sort of a northwestern angle from Redimu up to the Wānanga River. But yeah, they included 88,000 acres into the block. Now, because of that, although the Native Land Court Act 1880, under which the block was dealt with, stipulated at sections 27 to 33 that if a block of land was vested and a survey was still to be done, then a survey would be completed and a title issued. And that's what the judge ordered, that a survey be completed and the title issued. Now, because it incorporated 88,000 acres of another block called the Aotea, or the King Country block, just to go back a bit there, the King Country block was developed by the people of that area, about 5 million acres, covering basically Rohi Potai. And they were starting with an outer boundary that they paid for. And the outer boundary came down across what became the Waimarino Block, down from the Wānanga River, down to the Redimu, back up to Mount Ruapehu, and so on. Anyway, the Crown was determined to break it. So they didn't advertise the survey plan for Waimarino Block, which incorporated the 88,000 acres of the Aotea block. So the people living in that block who thought they belonged to the Aotea block suddenly, because it didn't have their names down, became landless, and they became known as the landless natives of the northern Waimarino. There's quite a lot written about them in different areas. The problem you've got with the Waimarino Block, though, is there's still no title today.
Really?
No title today. So how could a group sell a block of land with no title? The block doesn't exist. It's not space science. If you're going to sell a block of land, you have boundaries to it and so on, and there's no way the Crown's going to deal in a block of land with no title.
No title, yep.
Anyway, they went and just ignored the Native Land Court Act stipulations of 1880, and vested the land in 1,005 owners. The majority of the owners, of course, weren't listed because they were living in the Aotea section. And on the 5th of April 1887, the Crown claimed it had purchased 384,260 acres of 458,500 acres. Fine. They then set up what they called the non-seller reserves, one of them being, number 2 block, that was Kōrero, number 3 block, Manganeotio, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8, just around the area. And the seller reserves, Waimarino Block A, which is where the Waimarino Forest is today, a B reserve, Mangapura, C and D reserve further up, etc., etc. To divide and rule, they'd put, say, 3 or 4 people of an area into the block, and the rest missed out. And as you can imagine, there were massive screams and yells. Incidentally, too, what's not generally known is that Marae were better educated in those days than Europeans were. And you only have to go back as far as Taylor, Reverend Taylor. When he was coming up the river in 1850, I think it was October, I just can't remember the exact date, he mentioned that he had to take a whole lot of pencils and paper up. Why? Because these people wrote to each other more thoroughly than Europeans did at the time. So they could all read and write, very well educated for their time. And, of course, they knew statute legislation backwards. Very bright people. And they had to, because they had to represent themselves and couldn't trust the lawyers of the day to do it for them. Anyway, to get back to the Waimarino Block, although there was no title, they set up these sellers and non-seller reserve. One of the non-seller blocks was Waimarino Block number 5, 13,200 acres, centred on the junction of the Mangatiri stream and the Whanganui River. Now, in the original plan, it incorporated the 267 acres at Tieke that became the subject of the controversy. But in 1891, on the 29th of December 1892, my mistake, the 267 acres was declared to be part of the public domain. Now, well, there's people living there, right?
Yeah.
There was a couple of objections, and the Crown said, well, okay, you can stay there, but it's still Crown land. Right? This is how bad it was. It was really quite terrible. Anyway, that was fine. There was some controversy, but in 1908, I think it was, Rangihuato died. Oh, just let me go back there. The Prime Minister called into Tieke in 1895, so it was recognised as a representative Kāinga that parliamentarians and even the Prime Minister would visit. They came down the Tānarako, down the Whanganui canoe. In fact, it was Fred Cribb, Boy Cribb's father, great-grandfather, who looked after the canoe that brought them down, believe it or not.
Who was the Prime Minister?
Richard John Seddon.
Oh, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Anyway, called in and, there was some argument apparently about the Waimarino Block, but I don't know what the detail was because, of course, it's left out of the annexes and appendixes to the House of Representative Journals because of the delicate nature of a block with no title. And just before I forget, the problem has always been with the Waimarino Block that judges have always put it in a too hard basket. And the consequence of that has been that the judiciary has got more and more blackened, I suppose one could say, by those with some knowledge of what's going on by hiding the truth. Right down to the last report of Judge Wainwright, where although Kathy Marr in the original Waimarino Block report for the Wānanga Tribunal says, there's no title for Waimarino Block for 384,260 acres, the judge does not repeat that. Mm-hmm. Why? Well, she's open slather, right?
It creates too much of a problem for them.
And it also makes the system look very, very
dodgy.
Corrupt, I suppose one could say. And it's no one's fault today, but it's what's happened, right? Now, getting back to Tieke, in 1908, the Rangihuato died, I think it was 1908 he died. Anyway, the people just slowly dissipated off the Marae. Although the memory of the Marae being there was always kept from different families like at Pipariki and those. They all knew that was the Marae, you know. Let's go forward a few years. When I was a young fellow, for some reason I ended up staying down at Lucy Hinana's. And I'll never forget a statement she made to me. She said, the Pākehā are thieves, right? That was one. And the other one was, don't ever investigate the Waimarino Block. Because if you do, it'll become an obsession and you won't be able to get away from it. Okay. I went off to law school, right, did my studies, and got a bit bored with it and joined the army. And then after 9 years, I had this inkling about that Waimarino Block, but more so I was in the army and we were looking at new technologies coming on. The first fax I ever saw was on annual camp one year. I couldn't believe it. And, of course, I just thought, hey, if you look at all this new technology coming out, there's going to be a whole lot more leisure time. But how are we going to deal with leisure time? Leisure time has always been a very powerful symbol of wealth, right? But what you do with that time in the modern era will become indicative of your status. So the rich go skiing and the poor play rugby league sort of thing, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, now we're going to become very international. How is New Zealand going to promote itself in this new era? Oh, we're going to be the outdoors destination for middle-class people, right? Okay, suddenly a Department of Conservation's invented. Suddenly there's all these new national parks and reserves and what have you going on, including the Whanganui National Park, right? So, yeah, the locals are saying, well, okay, before you go ahead with this park, can you prove you purchased the land properly? Well, they produced this document called Crown Land Purchases 1881 to 1916, which was very, very brief on the Waimarino Block, but in fact didn't cover anything, and it certainly didn't state there was no title. But anyway, what I thought was going to happen was that with the new Department of Conservation, they became the alpha and the omega of conservation. And the second biggest group of conservationists recognised by the government were Marae. If you look at the number of big Marae bush blocks, especially on the river, nothing was said about them, or if it was, Marae neglected land and it had to be taken over by the Crown to be properly conserved within a national park. My idea was, hold on, if these people are that good at conservation that you're saying, and they did in National Park and Reserves Authority Series number 28, I can't remember the year of that, but it was somewhere around about 1990. They said that we have actual boundaries for the park and ideal boundaries. And, of course, the ideal boundaries went around the big Marae-owned blocks, you know, the multiply-owned blocks.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, this is getting pretty bizarre, you know. You're actually denying the achievement of a particular group of conservators and implying that even though you've got no conserved land yourself, that you can conserve that land better than the people have conserved it, you know. I thought, this is bizarre, you know. It was really mental gymnastic stuff. So having done law, years ago I approached a few people and said, those blocks that are within the ideal boundaries that the Crown wants for the National Park, they said, yeah. I said, can we have meetings of each of those blocks and set up trusts on that land? And the aim of each trust, the terms of trust for each block will be the same. But, of course, different trustees to represent different families on different blocks. And the terms of trust were as follows: to establish and maintain a school of indigenous material culture, temperate rainforest, upper Whanganui River, designed to prepare New Zealanders for more cost-effective extended leisure activity within and greater appreciation of the native rainforest, to redefine presently dated Neolithic life skills within the context of the technological revolution and greater leisure time. to provide an annex to a school of Wanganui esoteric culture, that's wānanga stuff, and to maintain effective race relations. Now, when the Crown came to take over those lands, you'd say, hold on, we set something up so we can teach you how we get it to the standard. So what you're doing is changing the balance there. Okay. So, yeah, these families agreed. So Witianga 2B, 16B, 8B, which is up opposite Wakahora, that 6,000 acre block there. There's two severances, one across towards Tauhara. What's another one? Waimarino 5B7 at the southern junction of the Mangatiri Stream and the Wanganui River. That was Pat Ronganui had a strong interest there. Popatia 2B, just south of Kahura on the same side of the river, opposite Bungapukatia number 2. A number of other blocks, but it doesn't really matter. They were dotted right throughout the park. Yeah. So it was like a military strategy, you know. Now, we put the claim in for the Waimarino Block and suddenly we're invited into direct negotiation. What? Yep. Well, what you've said in your claim is that when the Waimarino Block was originally sketched up, it was 454,500 acres. Yep. Then that was passed through on the 16th of March, 1886. Yep. On the 7th of April, 1887, according to Plan WD 776, or ML 776, depending on what area you're looking at, it's become 458,500 acres. I said, yep. So you're asking for the difference to be handed back to the families, and what you want is to set up a wānanga. Yep, that's about right. So anyway, they closed down Waikini Prison, right? And said, well, there's your wānanga starting point. We said, on what basis are you giving us this? This is 1987. What basis are you giving us this prison? And they said, well, it's in recognition and a return for the gift of Mount Ravahe to the nation. I said, what gift? So we had a look in archives, and what you've got, there's the payments paid to each of these. There was 21, I think, people involved. And it was all £100 a signature, you know. Here's one for you. Kumaro signed National Park deed on receiving £100 and a promise in writing to grant him 100 acres in Waimarino Block, right? And so on and so forth. Now, they've always claimed Te wasn't paid, but if you look at the payment registers for Waimarino Block, for a couple of days before the gift, there's £100 for his assistance in the Waimarino Block. And, of course, the peaks, you know, adjoin the block. So anyway, that's fine. We said, well, we can't accept the prison on that basis. It's a joke, you know. It's a sacred mount that these guys go on about, and under the table is money changing hands. Come on. Don't make a fool of us. We're an academic institution, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't start off on that basis, you know. And I made a huge mistake. I shouldn't have done it, but I got really upset about it, the offer. Anyway, they're having a big get-together on, I think it was the 18th of, whatever the date of the gift was, in 1987. And it was 100 years since the gift, you know. So what I did was take the treasury vouchers and all the minutes and what have you, and I get a big one, you know, screen print that on T-shirts, you know. Here's one from Grace to the Secretary of the Lands Department. So-and-so signed National Park deed for £100. Shall I charge the £100 to the National Park or Rangipo North number 1? All of this stuff, you know, shocking. Anyway, suddenly I'm getting followed around by police and all sorts of weird stuff. And having just come out of the army, I knew a guy called Brigadier Smith. Now, Brigadier Smith was, at that time, director of the Security Intelligence Service. He's coming out saying, there are some people out there using legal means to interfere with the security of the state. What the hell is he talking about? And then I clicked. Here they put forward this fantasy about Māori this and Māori that and great chiefs and what have you to create a fiction, right? And they had the wider community out there saying, oh, Māori are lovely and they've gifted. And it kept both groups sort of under a form of control. That's all anybody can put it. And here's Joe Bloggs, who, I mean, I joined the army, I did passed an officer selection board, went to Portsmouth. You know, here's he not towing the line, right? Well, hey, you don't tell me that you represent my family because you've got a racial background similar to them. You don't imply that my family believes certain things because they happen to be of that race or this race. You know, my wife's part Jewish. I've never yet met a rabbi who came up and claimed to represent her.
Yeah.
And just on that, as an aside, I've got a sister-in-law who smacked up and hospitalised 4 guys in the Awakini pub one night, gang members. She might be Jewish, but she's sitting on a peaceful tree, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
No one can represent. Anyway, after that T-shirt business, David Longy was the Prime Minister, and he went berserk, and they put this is how they did it. There was a guy called Mel Smith who was the Deputy Secretary of Corrections at the time, and I kid you not, this happened. They lined all the prisoners up outside of the prison and said, go to it, and they smashed the prison to pieces. Remember
Waikini.
Yeah, remember that? Yeah, okay. Suddenly it became worthless, and then the offer that was made to us to set up the wānanga there was quietly withdrawn, you know what I mean? And we ended up with not having a base, you know, to work towards. We had the training grounds. The other thing was, of course, once that land was set aside as training grounds for the School of Indigenous Material Culture, I told you about before, the Marae blocks, we claimed that we needed the whole park as a training ground as well, you know. So, so things went quiet. And then it was called, if I remember rightly, the Department of Conservation had come in by that stage, and they had these regulations where suddenly if you're going down the river, you had to stay at certain sites and you had to pay for it. And one of them was Tieke. We thought, blow that. So we called a meeting of the descendants of those who were part of that family. And there's about 4 or 5 different hapi there actually. And we had a meeting at Rarohi Marae and did proper minutes and what have you. And a number of people led the way, one being Pauli Haitana, Ringi Bristol, and who else? Well, it doesn't matter. We'll just leave it at that. And they went up and occupied. Now, what we were against immediately was people coming and staying there paying dock for land that had been pinched, you know. Going back to the real legal reason, the original plan showed the 267 acres that were taken by proclamation on the 29th of December 1892 as being part of number 5 non-seller block. Somehow it was on that date proclaimed to be public domain belonging to the Crown. They could do what they liked with it, although the Maori could stay there, which is a bizarre situation, but that's what happened. I've got the papers at home to show it all. And there's been a lot of studies done on it too. So when they went, right, and the government then said, well, okay, we'll have to negotiate, because what we said was, well, if we're wrong, arrest us. And I think what really shook the government was it was stated by some person of Irish background that he believed that we had an implied constitutional right to be arrested if we broke the law. And the Crown didn't know how to handle that statement. So they left us alone. And that's basically how we got involved there. Now, the government has always tried to avoid any discussion of the title issue for Waimarino Block, right? What they tried to talk about was the fact that in 1920 there's a letter offering back 10 acres where Tieke is. And, yeah, you know, you can deal with that. Now, they offered back the 10 acres, and we said, no, you pinched 267. Now, if I go out and pinch 267, I've got to give it back. I don't give 257 back. You know, it was bizarre. And it's when I started to wonder about the mindset, having come from the army, you know, and to that, what's going on here? It's bizarre. It doesn't make any sense, you know. Yet the powers that be thought that was acceptable, you know. So you're dealing with, well, I don't want to call it racial, but it's almost like a racist headspace, you know. So bizarre. Anyway, that's how it all started. I became the original secretary. Oh, the wānanga Trust, being the negotiators for the Waimarino Block, called the meeting at the power up here.
Tieke, yeah.
Okay. And we then got going. Gee, it was the busiest 3 weeks of my life. I had to get the bank account set up. I was running all over the place. I was doing it like I was an army exercise, but everything has to be done properly.
Yep.
And, yeah, talk about tired. But we got it all done. And then, you know, Baldy and a few others went up there, Rangi Bristol, and did their thing, and then it became a huge attraction. There were hundreds went up there. We had some odd experiences. Here's one that would probably make you laugh. One guy was getting a bit stroppy with the tourists and being the big shot, you know, walking around. So I rang up Mickey, Dennis Tuirirangi, who was driving the jet boat, said, oh, so-and-so up there, you've got to take him out. He's really starting to offend some of the tourists. Because we're getting quite a good name. It's a protest group. So Mickey goes up there and his father wants him. He's got to come out straight away. That's how we had to handle the sort of smart alecks. But yeah, that's basically what happened with Tieke. But because they dealt with the 267 acres only, and we really wanted to have a look at the wider issue of the non-title for the whole block. With Harry Hightower, we did Whakapapa, which is further up. And the Crown was very quiet about that one because that's on number 1 block, right? That's on the area with no title. And they offered to enter into a memorandum of understanding and all of that. I think one of the problems they had with me was that I never saw things, being an ex-soldier, I never saw things in terms of race. It was in terms of ownership, you know. When I was in the military, you could have people from all over the world were in the military. And the one thing they didn't tolerate was differentiation on the basis of race. And if you've been in the army long enough, you actually start to wonder what the hell they're talking about outside of that context, you know. And my whole approach was nothing to do with Maori. It was all about who owned it, you know. Now, just to take it one stage further, this might help people understand more what I'm getting at. I objected vociferously to the establishment of Maori wards for the council. Now, when I did my presentation, I did it like this. I said, you know, we have people talking about Maori under-educational achievement, Maori health problems, Maori criminal offending. Now, Maoris need help to get on the council. That's how I see it. Okay. Now, when I was in the military and did my Special Air Service selection course, 85% of the SAS were Maori. And you're telling me that those people need help to get on the damn council? It's just ridiculous. Now, why aren't you publicising the fact that 85% of the SAS, your top academic soldiers, your top physical soldiers, are Maori? None of these guys need any special help and education or health or whatever. None of these guys are prisoners. Dead silence. Why is that? And, of course, dead silence. Then one of the guys who actually stood for mayor said to me at the end of all of that, how can we help Maori? What? I said, well, I don't know about Maori. I said, some of these people are whiter than I am.